Hello and welcome to Dev Survival Guide. My name is Ben and I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. This channel is dedicated to helping other people become programmers, take it up as a hobby, or even become software engineers. This video is about helping people in the early stages. The early stages of programming can be really tough and overwhelming. So I have advice that I want to give to anybody in these stages, whether you haven't even started yet or you're in your first few months. You can find a ton of tutorials out there that say what you want to learn and exactly when, but I want to talk more about the mindset that you need to have if you really do want to make programming a hobby or turn it into a career. So without further ado, this is advice for anybody in the early stages of learning how to code. Okay, tip number one is that anybody can code. And the reason why this is tip number one, this might sound, kind of obvious, but this is for those who are doubting yourselves. And I know that was me early on because I know I work at Microsoft today, but let me paint you a picture of way back when I started. When I started, I had a 2.3 GPA out of high school. I was going to a community college because I had no money whatsoever and no mentors whatsoever. And on top of all that, the only reason I chose computer science is because I liked video games. That was it. I didn't know anything about coding and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So all that being said, I had a lot of doubts in myself. I didn't know whether or not I could do it. And even when I took my first coding course, it felt like I was sort of behind everybody else. And to the point that I had to rewrite programs 2 to 3 times just to make sure that I understood them. So it wasn't an easy journey for me. And take it from me, I've also taught hundreds of people how to code and seen so many people struggle with the same things that I struggled with. So the point here is really just to tell you that everybody struggles. The journey is tough, but you can do it. You just need to stick with it and follow some of the other pieces of advice that I'm going to give you. And you really can do it. So don't let your own assumptions get in the way, because if I had done that, I would not be where I am today. So let me end this tip with a quote from Michael Jordan. Start with hope. Tip number 2 is to focus on the concepts, not the language. Too many people overthink their first programming language, and it makes sense. There's a lot of them, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. The differences between languages aren't going to matter yet, and the simple fact is just about everything that you learn in C# can transfer directly over to Java and can transfer over to Python and can transfer over to these other languages. It'll, in some cases, look very different, but in general, the underlying concepts are the same. So don't worry too much about the language early on. Now, focusing on the fundamentals here. So the concepts you learn in the first stages would be like variables, data types, if statements, functions, loops, arrays. So let's just list off those as like core fundamentals. For my job today, I use all of those things. There's no avoiding it. So it really pays off early on if you decide to, while you're learning an if statement, really take your time, write 2 to 3 different programs, just testing yourself on this thing. What also helps is breaking your code, intentionally breaking your code. So breaking your code and just seeing, if an if statement works like this, does it work like this? Oh, okay, that broke. What was the error message telling me? Breaking your code and paying attention to the errors that come up can help you when you unintentionally break your code and you remember that it was because of this one thing you did. And getting better at programming is really getting better at solving problems, which means running into a lot of problems. So breaking your code ahead of time can save you a lot of time in that respect. Something else you can do is save all your projects. Don't delete any projects. And it also helps if you put a comment on top of each one, just explaining what it does, because recreating projects is a fantastic way to test your knowledge on something. And especially when you have the working version of it, you can always try to recreate it. And if you get stuck, just look at the version you already have. So don't delete any of your projects. Constantly challenge yourself by recreating these projects or just using them as reference. I've done that so many times. And break your code. Break your code. Trust me, you will save yourself a lot of time in the future when you run into issues that you've seen before because you broke your code in a controlled sort of way. So that's tip number 2, is focus on the concepts, not the language. And again, just don't rush it. One of the most common mistakes that I see people make here is they rush the early stages because they want to make an app or a game or something like that. So it's a very common mistake. Try not to make that. That's tip number 2. Actually, before I end this tip, something else that's super useful to do when learning these fundamentals is if you had a project that used an if statement before, and that's your sample project, and then you later on learn a loop, you can go back to your original project and add your new concepts to it. So bring concepts from newer projects into older projects to make them just a little bit more advanced. All right, tip number 3 is probably the most important tip here, and it is to make projects that sound really easy. At some point, you're going to want to make projects, right? We all get there where you've done your intro course or you've done some beginner tutorials and now you want to make something. My recommendation here is not to jump straight into that game that you want to make or that app that you want to make, because you would not believe how much more complicated that makes things. So I fell into this trap once before. After my intro to coding course, I decided I was going to make a Pokemon battle simulator, and Unity wasn't around at the time, and so I was following an OpenGL tutorial. And this tutorial, I was copy pasting code. I didn't really know what I was doing, and by the time that I finished it, I was stuck because I didn't know how to modify anything, let alone really how I even got to that point. So the point here is recognize when you're in over your head. Are you copy pasting a ton of code? Have you been stuck for a very long time now? It's okay to take a step back. It's okay to abandon a project too. So when you do run into the situation, you can abandon it. You have options here. You can also simplify it. So this Pokemon battle simulator that I was trying to make, I simplified it into a purely text-based one. And it really worked out because it allowed me to focus on just the core concept behind the idea that I had. So I really do not recommend anybody in the early stages jump into Unity or Unreal Engine or really any fancy engine, any fancy framework even in some cases. Just don't jump into those dream projects you have right away, because that is going to get you way too far in the deep end, and you might get lost there and you might give up. So I don't want you to fall into that trap. So understand when you are making something that's just way too complicated for you and simplify. All right, tip number 4 is to embrace your mistakes. So as an example, I had just talked about that failed game project that I did that turned into a successful game project. You are going to make so many mistakes when it comes to programming. What does that mean? That means you're going to miss that curly brace and it's going to take you forever to find it, or the semicolon that took you forever to realize you forgot, and some logic that you broke and didn't realize you broke it and it took forever to figure it out. These things happen. It's just sort of built into learning a new skill. So when I say embrace your mistakes, I mean don't just get frustrated and try to move forward. Like really, really slow down and ask yourself, how did I get here? And don't judge yourself when you're doing this, by the way, because everybody does this, right? I've done it too. I've taught so many people that do this, where they just feel bad that they're making so many mistakes and that they're getting confused. Getting confused is the default state for a programmer, let me tell you. Especially with my day job, I get confused all the time. So don't feel bad about that. Like, part of the job is being confused. What you need to get better at is handling those mistakes and getting better after every single one. Honestly, it seems like the more senior engineers are just the ones that have made more mistakes, that have had more exposure to doing different things where you can't avoid it. So understand that making mistakes is part of the process. And when you do make some of these mistakes, reflect on them and don't judge yourself. And you will learn exceptionally faster if you can do this. So there's tip number 4. Embrace your mistakes and learn from them. All right, tip number 5, the final tip, is to really just take things one step at a time. It is that simple. Take things one step at a time, and suddenly you'll realize you ended up somewhere. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I did not get here overnight. It took a million steps, and my journey started 10 years ago when I started learning how to code. And, in retrospect, the most important thing that I did throughout this entire journey is just be consistent with it and keep making stuff and keep taking one step at a time, despite all the setbacks, despite all the struggles and all that. It really comes down to, do you have the determination to see it through? I would imagine you'd get the same advice if you wanted to learn how to play guitar or the piano, or like right now, I'm learning how to make YouTube videos, and this video is going to be terrible, but I'm learning from my mistakes and just going one step at a time. So yeah, just be prepared, because it's a long haul. You don't learn programming in just a few months. You can't become a software engineer in just a few months. Maybe you can. Maybe you're some god-tier programmer out there. But this video is not for that person. This video is for everybody else, which I feel like I fall into that category. But yeah, for the last piece of advice, it's just take things one step at a time. Okay? That's video number 1. Feels weird to say that, because I've been spending forever writing a video like this, and then I didn't even use like 80% of my script when I recorded it. So this video might be terrible, but I'm going to be learning the lessons that I am teaching in this video, like learning from my mistakes. That's what's happening right now. Taking things one step at a time. At some point I have to publish the first video, right? And even if it's terrible, it just is what it is. So I hope that I didn't discourage anybody from starting to learn how to code. I really, really believe that anybody can do this. It is hard, but you can. And yeah, if this type of video interested you at all, or you found anything useful from it, please, I guess, subscribe. It feels weird saying that. Yeah, so I will continue doing these videos. I don't have a schedule. I'm just going to do it one step at a time. And yeah, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.